Well, hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. Today, we're going to paint a model that I got relatively recently. Mr. Bazdrogg Nekk-Choppa. Bazdrogg Nekk-Choppa. Unfortunately for Mr. Nekk-Choppa, he is not the star of this particular show. Instead, the stars of this show are a brand new set of paints that I got that I haven't had a chance to use yet. There's a brand new set of acrylic paints from Huge Miniatures. A lot of these colors look really good, and I like some of the other stuff that Huge Miniatures puts out, so I have high hopes for these, especially for some of the problem colors, like orange and yellow. So, let's check it out and see how they stack up. Alright, here is Mr. Nekk-Choppa. He looks sufficiently threatening. And more importantly, here are the paints that I'll be using. This is the line I was talking about. It's Huge Miniatures. If you haven't heard about these acrylic paints, I wouldn't be all that surprised. I haven't seen much coverage about it. This was a result of a Kickstarter of a company that produces pretty high quality, or at least in my opinion, hobby supplies. I'll give you some examples. These guys, I'm a huge fan of Huge Miniatures grass tufts. They come in interesting shapes. They have a nice height to them. Some of my favorite tufts so far. Similarly, I use Huge Minis, Urban Fine Grit. Actually, there's a couple of different sizes of grit, but these are basically just basing material. Not coincidentally, all over this base is this stuff. So I ran across these paints as I was keeping an eye on products like these, and I noticed that they had announced that their Kickstarter was successful. They were shipping these paints out, and I thought, darn, I missed out on this Kickstarter. But, you know, whatever, I don't need new paints. I have got plenty of paints. There's another one on that side that you can't see. But I was having some issues with my current lineup of paints. I use Army Painter for most of my paints, but the oranges and yellows left something to be desired. So I've been exploring the, I guess, other ranges of paints, including a few Citadel colors that I have rebottled because the pots are a pain and I've only got a few. I don't have a ton of them, so it wasn't that much of a big a deal to rebottle these. At any rate, I saw the announcement and I thought, hey, you know what? Why not? Give it a shot. I intended to just buy orange so I can test them out, but they're actually kind of inexpensive, so I decided, yeah, why not? It was $60 for these 16 paints. I thought, let's give it a shot. So, the plan is to use these paints to paint up these guys. This guy. I don't anticipate that these will be a mind-blowing difference from the paints that I have already come across. But for my very first attempt to use them, just want to give them a blind test. Just want to see what they feel like and go from there. Now this is a limited range, so I don't have a bunch of other colors. Like, for example, I don't have the metallic line. I don't have the neutrals line, which is like the bone color or browns. I don't have any of those, so I'll have to substitute those paints where I need them, but I'm trying to stick to just these, and that should be fine. And I'm going to stop talking about the plan because in my videos, inevitably, I'll spend 5-10 minutes talking about the plan, and then immediately I'll deviate. So I'm not going to waste any of that time talking about the plan. Generally speaking, I want to have orange armor and some green skin. Everything else is fair game. So let's get started with the Basecoat Glaze. I lied. Let's not get started with Basecoat Glaze. Let's talk a little bit about the model, building it, and whatnot. Here are some observations about this model. It's nice, it's hefty. Building it can be a little finicky because the joints between, say, the arms and the shoulder and the leg and the body, they're kind of vague. You can put the arm kind of in any of a range of places, but only one of them is correct, and so you can't really feel it lock into place. And this happens for both of the arms, the shoulder pad a little bit, certainly the knife. I mean, the knife, they tried with a little notch, but it's a little weird. The back, yeah, a lot of it is kind of vague, and so there's a little bit of intuition to putting this guy together, which I am not a fan of, but the result is pretty nice. One of the other things that I do want to point out that is kind of, I wouldn't say unique, but it is a trend that is kind of epitomized by this model, is you'll notice how much negative space there is. There's a lot of gaps in between parts of this model. If you look closely here, you see where the armor, how it's laying over the arm? There's a considerable gap between the armor and the arm, and that isn't sloppy assembly. It's supposed to be that way. Look at how much gap there is underneath those shoulder plates. I think this is Games Workshop's attempt to play and to introduce more negative space to make the models look more realistic, and I'm down for that, except that it's going to make painting this guy a bit more of a challenge, because now if I assemble everything like the way I have here, I have to get my brush in these tiniest little crevices, which is going to be less than fun. So I either paint in sub-assemblies, gross, or we just have to sneak in our brush any place we can. And so that's what I'm going to give it an attempt. But I just want to kind of point out to you that in terms of building, this one's a little more challenging than your average Games Workshop model. Probably not as challenging as the Umbral 6, that operative, the other 1-year anniversary model. And painting it is probably going to be a bit of a challenge. So this is why I went with this Zenithal Prime. I went with flat black to give it the first kind of coat, and then I went with skeleton bone for the top, because I'm not going to use transparent paints, but I kind of need anything that's in shadow to be very, very dark, because I don't want it to look unpainted. I want it to look very dark. So if inevitably I miss some stuff back there, it's not sloppy painting, it's shadows. Yeah, they're supposed to be that way. So I spent a lot of time talking. Thank you for bearing with me. Now, let's get to painting. Here is our friend, Mr. Nekk-Choppa. So there's a mixture of paint brands on here. I did everything I could with Huge Miniatures paints, but just the brown, I don't have a brown in this line, so that was Army Painter. But here's what it looks like. Most of these paints, I had 2 passes. I'm trying to get familiar with how, what the coverage looks like and how much I can water it down. I still always want to water down my paints, but I'm never quite sure how much. I have to kind of play around with it a little bit. And so as a result, I ended up having to do 2 coats with the red, less so the green and the black. They seem to work pretty well, just thinning them down with a little bit of water. I haven't had to use any flow improver yet. Coverage is pretty good. There's something weird about them I don't quite grasp. The colors like red and orange, you can see right there, that's a single pass. That's a single coat of their orange, which I'm kind of sad it's not called Craft Dinner Orange, because that's what it looks like. Instead it's called Nebula Orange. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way it covers. The red I'm still playing with. I don't know if the coverage lack is because of my over thinning or something with the paint. So there's some more playing around to do, but the model itself looks okay. Obviously, this is just a base coat, so it looks a little drab. And that I'll fix in this next step, which is washing. Normally, the next step would be to fix that drabness by applying a coat of wash. But before I do that, I want to bring these colors up to their normal values. In other words, I went with red for that armor, but that actually isn't the color that I want. That red is going to be my undercoat for the orange that it's supposed to be. Same thing with the brown of the orc's skin tone. That's not going to be brown, that's going to be green, and there's a couple of ways for me to make that happen. Most of the time I'll use dry brushing, but I think in this case I'm just going to have to go with a little bit of layer paint. So basically carefully apply the actual color to most of those spots and leave the kind of the base coat showing through in some spots and acting as the shadows. So for the armor, the orange will be the midtone, the red will be the shadows, and the green will be the midtone for the orc's skin, and the brown will be the shadows. That's the plan. It's not something I'm particularly good at, but the model is kind of protruding. It's got stuff everywhere, and if I try to dry brush that midtone on, it's going to get in places that I don't want. So I'm going to have to carefully apply that as a layer. So for the first time in my quick painting approach, we're going to go with some layer paint. Washing phase, it's so satisfying. It turns a grubby looking model into something that's starting to look like it could be display worthy, at least tabletop worthy for sure. So there's a few major elements of washing in this step, and I'll describe them here in a little bit of detail. So you'll see the orange parts of Nekk-Choppa's armor. These were all washed with Acrylic Earthshade from Citadel Paint. It's this stuff right here. The idea here is to darken up the orange a bit. It was kind of bright. It allows me to establish some deeper shadows, and it'll help me establish highlights later on. But it worked fairly well. It's a delicate wash, and it works well for what I needed to do. I used the same Acrylic Earthshade on elements like these, all these bone, and you'll see some leather elements here. All that stuff got the same Acrylic Earthshade. The skin of Nekk-Choppa was the big test. I wanted him to look green as opposed to this brown thing that I have, and 2 coats of the Army Painter Military Shader, which is this stuff right here, helped me green up the skin without making it too bright. There's a green tone that Army Shader also has on offer that does the job pretty well, but it's a little brighter. This is a little bit more muted, and I think it was more appropriate for the orc's skin tone. For elements like this is kind of a dark gray, or it was light gray, but now it's a dark gray. I added some Nuln oil to those elements. There wasn't a ton, and I did the same thing to the black, although it's hard to tell because it was fairly black to begin with, so the Nuln Oil didn't really do much, but that's okay. I wanted to make sure that if I had any establishable shadows, they would come up in this phase. So things like the cloak, the axe, the knife, these claws and the armor, all of those got a bit of Nuln Oil. As before, all the shades washes that I used on the orc model itself, I ended up using 2 coats because I wanted to introduce a bit more darkness than a single coat could provide. For the base, I just went with a thinned down version of Army Painter's Strong Tone, which is this stuff. It made the earth nice and dark, preparing the base for the next phases of this project. And finally, this yellow mane of hair of the unfortunate victim of Nekk-Choppa. I'm guessing that's how he got his name, right? This guy got his neck chopped. In fact, his face is a trophy right here on his belt, which is kind of grisly, but very, very orky. I gave this a wash of Fuegian Orange, which is this stuff by Citadel Color. It reinforced the orange shadows and again prepared this mane for the eventual color it would end up as. All in all, it looks pretty good so far in this step. Really, if you wanted to, you could add a few tufts of grass, rim the base black, fill in a few details, and you're ready to go. But I've got more to do to this model before we wrap this up, so let's move on to the detailing phase, shall we? Alright, let's talk details. So there were quite a few details on this model, more so than the previous few projects I've done, but less than, say, an elite unit from the Space Marines. Those troops have a ton of doohickeys and decorations and seals and amulets and what have you. This model didn't have as many of those, but it had more than, say, the Assassin I finished painting not too long ago, or even the Armigers that I painted not too long ago. So I went ahead and picked out the details. There were a lot of like fangs. There were a lot of leather straps that I used various browns on. I did, as part of the detailing phase, I dry brushed some dark silver metallic paint over all the black pieces. So on the axe, you'll see some of that dry brush on there. It's a black head, but I dry brushed it with that silver to kind of emphasize the edges and also give it the streaking kind of, let's say here's the axe head. The streaking was kind of going across it horizontally to kind of imply that it's been going through a lot of things, possibly armor, and in Nekk-Choppa's case, I'm guessing necks. The pauldrons on this model also had a little bit of detail, usually some skulls, and some kind of armor plating, so I made sure to pick those out in bone white. There were a couple little spikes on various parts of the model, on that little head dress that he's got, or I don't know, the banner pole that he's got, and on the axe I made sure to hit those with a nice bright red. There was an interesting detail to this model. He is holding the head of what I'm assuming is an immortal, or the Space Marine version, the Space Marine variant that is used in Age of Sigmar. He's holding his head in his left hand, and so I believe those are all gold, so I made sure that the head was gold, but the immortal's face mask is sitting on his belt as a trophy, kind kind of grisly, but the guy's name is Nekk-Choppa, so what are you going to do? So yeah, that got a hit of gold. It was in this phase also that I ended up doing a lot of, I'm guessing glazing is the right word for it. Not the base coat glazing, but actually taking the existing, say, base coat and transforming it into a slightly different variation. So after the wash phase, my orc's armor was looking pretty red. It was like a dull reddish brown or brownish red. Yeah, brownish red is probably a better way to go. So it was red with a lot of brown in it because of the wash, and that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted orange. So I took a glaze, so kind of watered down some orange paint, and I laid it over on kind of the top areas. So I used it as a highlight, and so I very carefully brushed it in a bunch of different places. I did the same thing with the orc skin. I made sure to use a lighter green on kind of the top surfaces of the various parts of the skin that were exposed. And it gave me a nice bit of contrast. So there's a couple of different greens on his skin tone. There's a couple of different oranges on his armor. I even highlighted with some bright yellow on just the very top parts of that. So that was a nice touch. It was my first attempt at actually glazing. Like, I've tried it before, didn't go so well. I think it looks okay here. Certainly have room to improve, but this was a step in which I did that. I made sure that his eye patch got some love. It's a black metal eye patch, kind of like his axe and his knife. And he's got a single yellow eye. I'm kind of digging that. So here he is, Mr. Nekk-Choppa. I keep calling him Mr. Nekk-Choppa. I started getting into the habit, and now I don't remember his first name, and that's okay. He looks, I'd say he looks pretty neat. The orange is orange, and the orc skin is green. He's got a nice amount of details, a little bling happening. I'm pretty happy with my results. As I mentioned before, this is my first attempt at glazing a model. By that I mean just using several different colors on top of each other in various strengths to provide some highlights and kind of reestablish midtones. I sometimes use dry brushing for that, and that works well in a lot of models, and it's fast and easy and usually looks okay. This is a bit of a more measured approach. It's a bit more selective. It's a bit more strategic. I don't know necessarily that it looks better, but it certainly looks different. And in a model like this, dry brushing just really wasn't going to work. There's too much happening. There's too much. It's not, a lot of Games Workshop models are two-dimensional, so you can, not two-dimensional, but they're, I don't know, they're kind of all in a plane, so that when you dry brush, say I'm dry brushing the head, for example, I could do that reasonably well, but as you can see here, I can't dry brush the armor because there's these bones sticking out. There's just a lot of obstruction, so I could not dry brush. So if I was going to glaze any model, it was going to be this one. And you know what? I'm okay with the results for my first time trying, not first time trying it, but my first time really sticking to it. I think it looks pretty good. I've tried it before on capes and have failed miserably, and I usually gave up and tried again with another technique. This, I think this is good. It's going to help my confidence. It'll help me try it on other models and hopefully improve my painting skills. But as I said before, Mr. Nekk-Choppa wasn't the star of the show. The star of the show were these guys. And the verdict, you know what? They work. Turns out they paint and they do a pretty good job of covering. I didn't use all of these colors. I used, I'll tell you what I did use. I used this red, I used this orange, I used this yellow, this gray. I think these are the colors that I used for this model, and I did miss a couple of colors. I wish I had some browns. I wish I had some off-whites, but I supplemented them with my collection of Army Painter paints. But as a very first try, I think they show some promise. I need to work with them quite a bit more. They were a little gloopy when they hit the wet palette. They were kind of sticky, and I don't know if I didn't shake them enough. I forgot that these have an agitator ball in the bottle already. I assumed that they didn't, so whatever came out, I was just like, yeah, whatever. So they were a little thicker than I'm used to. There's that, and I don't know if that will stick up, but if you use them for the first time, they might be a little more concentrated than you expect. But they take thinning down with water pretty well. They cover pretty well. I was really impressed with the coverage of the orange and the yellow. In fact, these are the reasons that I wanted to buy alternative paints to begin with, because Army Painter yellows and oranges they leave a lot to be desired in terms of coverage. And so if for nothing else, these two colors, they passed the test, at least for my current needs. But I've got some others, and there are in shades that I don't already have, really. They're unique, or maybe not unique, but I don't have them in my personal collection. I'm sure Games Workshop or Vallejo or any Scale 75, I'm sure a bunch of those companies have similar shades, or I can look across all those ranges and find unique shades that I don't have. But this has supplemented my collection. I have a fairly substantial collection, so I don't know that I needed any more paints. But I have more paints, and so yay. At least I have some paints that I could for sure use, and I can explore some shades that I hadn't had before. Yes, I know I can pre-mix the colors I already have and arrive at something like this, but I don't know the first thing about mixing paints. Not really. I don't know enough about color theory, and I certainly don't know how many pigments are in these, or these, for that matter. Or these. These are Citadel color. I don't know if I mix a yellow and a red that I'll get an orange. Because for all I know, that yellow has 3 different pigments to get to that yellow. And when I mix them with the red, I'll get some kind of brown. So it's nice to have shades that I don't already have. They're already pre-mixed. It's from a company that I'm beginning to trust. So, takeaways for this video. If you are afraid of a technique because it's too challenging, it's beyond your current skill level, that's fine. That's what practice is about. Try it, practice it, figure out what's going wrong, and try to fix that. And eventually, you'll start getting better. Yeah. The other takeaway is these are cool. If you have paints that you want to replace or experiment with, or for whatever reason, if you need more paints or want more paints, maybe give Huge Miniatures a try. This is not a sponsored video, by the way. They don't know who I am, but I know who they are. And so far, I like their new paints. Thank you so very much for choosing Your Average Bear Gaming. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.